Okay, Mr. Britt says he can hear okay. Good stuff. We're off to a good start. Other than I'm freezing cold, because for those that don't know, I have an office with all of this kind of stuff in, but the office is at the bottom of the garden, and it's basically a glorified shed. And there is a heater, but for whatever reason it makes me sick. It gives me flu-like symptoms. So I'm sitting here wrapped up fighting the New World Order, and I hope everyone's here to join me today. Anyway, so hello and welcome to Resistance Radio and today's WideShut Webcast. As always, I'm your host Keelan Balderson, and you can check out all of my articles and videos at wideshut.co.uk. Resistance Radio now broadcasts to you live at 8 PM on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays and Sundays here at blogtalkradio.com/Resistance Radio. And of course, for more information, be sure to check out resistradio.com. It's been a busy few days for me, really. On Sunday night, I was a guest on the Tony Legend show on Manchester Radio Online. I've been on there a few times before. He sort of cancelled it for 6 months because he's a DJ, I believe, and he went out to Ibiza. But he came back and gave me another spot on the show. Only got 10 minutes this week, but I did manage to give a nice plug to Resistance Radio, and that's the main thing. And in fact, Tony introduced me as Keelan Balderson of Resistance Radio, which I think had quite a nice ring to it. The reason I only got 10 minutes is because Jim Core, formerly of The Cause, was on the show, followed by none other than Brian Gerrish. So I've got absolutely no problem being cut short for those guys. Great researchers, and two of the very few people that are really, waking people up in this UK truth movement en masse. They're the ones that are really, hammering it home. Brian Gerrish, of course, has the UK column, and Jim Core, obviously famous for being in The Cause, so he's been using his celeb status to get a lot of, pretty mainline interviews here in the UK and Ireland. So no worries to those guys. I've got absolutely no problem being cut off by them. If you go to youtube.com/WideShutUK, you can listen to their interviews as well as my little segment. I'll be back on the Tony Legend show this Sunday for a more detailed chat, so be sure to check that out. But of course, if he has me on before 9 PM, I'd rather you tuned into Lee's show on Resistance Radio and caught, the archive of me on Tony Legend, because I'll put that on YouTube. Because Resistance Radio is where it's at, folks. We're fighting the New World Order in the freezing cold in a shed, man. Come on. So today's topics. Well, I had an interesting run-in with the TV licensing people on Monday night. There was a rat-a-tat-tat at the door. Generally speaking, we just ignore the door unless we know somebody's coming, and we actually have one of those little peepee holes so we can see who's there. But for whatever reason, last night my mum decided to open the door, and lo and behold, it was a big scary TV enforcement officer. Notice how they call them enforcement officers. Ooh, it's all about the fear. And if you remember one of my previous shows, I mentioned that we recently moved house, and basically instead of sending them the sort of go away you treasonous scumbags letter, we just ignored their letters because they don't even have our details. So it's impossible for them to take us to court because they don't even know who the occupier is. And the only way they get you is if you cooperate. So you don't cooperate, it's that simple. So last night, this big, scary enforcement officer in his navy blue jacket with his imposing clipboard banged a couple of times on the door. He could have used the doorbell, but I'm sure he wanted to be a man and bang instead. And my dear mother answered the door and said, "Sorry, I'm busy cooking tea," and closed the door. End of story. It's that simple. Whether you have a TV license, whether you don't, whether you watch TV, whether you don't, whether you threw it out the door or whatever, it doesn't matter. Nobody Whether they call themselves an enforcement officer or not, nobody is allowed into your property without your permission. TV licensing have no more right than the postman to come into your door. You can be rude, you can be polite, it's probably better to be polite, but you can slam the door in their face without saying a word. Unless you invite them in, they're like a vampire. They simply can't come in. Unless, of course, they want to break the law, but that's another matter. And it's just peaceful non-compliance at its purest. You're not breaking the law, but you're not complying with them. Simple. And whether you need a license or you don't need a TV license, of course, I'd make the argument that you don't need one at all, whether you watch it or not. But either way, there's no way for them to prove you need one unless you let them in. So you're the one with the power, and that's the way it should be. They're just hoping that they can get you scared or talk you into letting them in, or that they try and tie you up in word games until you admit things. They feed off your fear and ignorance. They're actually trained as salesmen. They work on a commission. Every person they bust, they get a commission, and they're trained probably in NLP. Who knows? But they try and get you to admit things. They try and get you to sign bits of paper, and you can just shut the door. It's funny to me. And according to Wikipedia, 27% of those that are visited by these lovely enforcement officers end up then paying a TV license afterwards. So 27% of people get scared and go, "Oh, sorry, I'm really sorry, we did mean to get one. Oh, please come in, would you like a cup of tea?" It's ridiculous. Just remember who runs this country. We do. We elect the government, so don't fall for their dirty tricks and don't play their game. If you don't play, you can't lose. And I don't know whether I told you this on the other episode, but I'll let you in on a little secret. TV licensing have never produced evidence in court taken from a TV van or a handheld detection device. So in other words, they don't even exist. They can't sit in a van outside your house and beam a signal and get your TV, to see if you've got a license or whether your TV's switched on or whatever. Because these things don't actually exist. They can't stand at your door with a little device and go, "Oh, you're watching a TV, sir." They might do that to try and catch you out, but these things don't exist. They've never presented it as evidence in court. The only evidence they've ever presented is a signed agreement that you agreed that you were breaking their terms, which is ridiculous because just don't sign it. Some people get worried that they'll go and get the police, and I'm sure they've threatened this to people before. But I also did a little digging on the various websites that show you the freedom of information requests, and people have asked time and time again, "Can you please show me how many search warrants have been used in relation to TV licensing?" And they never show them. They just reject it. Various reasons. They say they can't do it, but they say, "No, sorry, we can't give you this information." So basically, no one has ever had a search warrant against them for TV licensing. It's all just a big game that you don't have to play. So I thought I'd share that little story with you, because all you have to do is shut the door. Say, "Yep, it's not convenient." Shut the door. Lawful, peaceful rebellion. So headlines for this week that I want to talk about. As I said last time, everything comes in steps, and legal aid facing cuts. That's one of the next steps. So the masses of poor in this country won't even be able to defend themselves. What a brilliant idea. Make everybody poor, force them into slave labour, and stop them having legal aid. Great, well done. Next headline I want to get into is high-tech eye scanners that track passengers coming to UK airports. So if the body scanners weren't enough, we now have to contend with eye scanners potentially if they get this through. I'll also be looking at the Ireland situation, the banking crash over there. Ireland pressured to seek a bailout, which is probably the worst thing they could do. I'll also be looking at the Fox News doing 9/11 Truth if I get time. Mr. Brit has been bringing some interesting points up on his YouTube about that. Are the mainstream media possibly trying to steer 9/11 Truth? Or are they really on our side? It's hard to tell. But first though, I want to talk about the HPV vaccine, which is being pressured onto young women in the UK en masse. You know, they've had a mass advertising campaign. They plastered the death of celebrity Jade Goody all over the news because she died of cervical cancer. And they're trying to push this vaccine onto everyone. And I'm just going to play this little clip of me on Tony Legend show where I was talking about the HPV vaccine. And then I'll come back and talk about it in some more detail. And hopefully the internet connection will pick itself up a bit.
And you also write news issues for your website, WideShut.co.uk. I'm just on there now, and some of the featured articles include a girl's bribed to take dangerous and pointless HPV vaccine. Tell us about this.
Well, first off, I'm not an expert on vaccines or anything, but all the information in that article is taken directly from the vaccine makers themselves, from their inserts, from the guidelines. There's quotes in there from Dr. Diane Harper, who was the lead researcher in the development of the vaccine. So when she says things like 70% of all HPV infections resolve themselves without treatment within a year, then I think it's quite important because she helped make the vaccine, especially when the government is trying to vaccinate all young women. But the story itself is just another tactic they'll use in order to get people vaccinated. So what they're doing is bribing young women and girls with high street shopping vouchers if they'll take the vaccine. And of course, our moronic media decide to turn the debate into whether it will make young girls more promiscuous or not. But they're missing the point. The debate should be whether the vaccine is safe and effective. And I've laid out in that article that it basically isn't safe and effective. Okay, we're back. That was me on the Tony Legend show talking about the HPV vaccine. I'm going to paste this article into the chat which lays everything out, but I'll talk about it as well. There's the article. So I'm just going to fire off some facts taken from the NHS and various other sources, because this is really an odds game, you know, and I'd say it works out that the vaccine is quite pointless when you really look at all the statistics. At each level, at each bit of information that I've looked at, the odds of it actually having any effect at all gets smaller and smaller at each stage. I don't mean effect as in bad side effects, I mean actually doing what it says it's supposed to do. And, you know, just to start off, the vaccine is not to vaccinate against cancer, which is the way it's sort of promoted. It's to vaccinate against the HPV infection that in some cases causes cancer. So that's the first deception. So getting vaccinated for the HPV infection doesn't mean you won't get cervical cancer. Furthermore, Dr. Diane Harper, the lead researcher in the development of both brands of HPV vaccines, the Severax in England and the Gardasil in America, she told the International Public Conference on Vaccinations in October last year that 70% of all HPV infections resolve themselves without treatment within a year. So the next bit of information, HPV itself has only a very small chance of causing cancer. And I looked on the NHS website and it says around 750 women die each year in the UK from cervical cancer. But, and this is a big but, causes also include smoking, taking the birth control pill, and having large numbers of children throughout life. These are all things that can also cause cervical cancer.